Ambassador Park Ji-woo stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Defense Coalition headquarters staring at the holographic display that showed the charges against Private Kang Dae-ho. The list was long and damning. Disobedience of direct orders, providing aid to enemy combatants, compromising mission security, conduct unbecoming of a soldier around the circular chamber. Representatives from dozens of alien species sat in their ornate seats, their eyes all focused on her. Some showed curiosity, others showed disgust, most showed the kind of cold calculation that came from centuries of interstellar warfare. The Vorthok representative, a tall insectoid creature with multiple arms, tapped his claws against his desk impatiently. The sound echoed through the chamber like raindrops on metal. He had been the most vocal critic of human involvement in the coalition military. Your species has proven once again that they are unfit for serious military service, he clicked in his harsh mechanical voice. This soldier has shown exactly why humans cannot be trusted with important missions. They are too emotional, too unpredictable, too weak. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Zilani delegate nodded her scaled head vigorously. The Koroth representative made a series of low, growling sounds that his translator rendered as strong disapproval. Ambassador Park remained calm. She had expected this reaction. She had known that the incident with Dae-ho would cause problems, but she had also known that this moment would come eventually. Humanity had always been different from the other species in the coalition. They felt things more deeply. They formed connections more easily. They saw individual lives where others saw only statistics. The coalition commander, a massive Thurian with stone-like skin and glowing red eyes, leaned forward in his throne-like chair. His voice boomed across the chamber when he spoke. The charges are serious, Ambassador Park. Your soldier has committed acts that would be considered treason in most of our militaries. He must face trial and punishment. This is not negotiable. Park nodded slowly. I understand the gravity of the situation, Commander, and I'm prepared to offer a solution that will address your concerns about human military capabilities. The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned to her. She could feel the weight of their attention, the mixture of curiosity and skepticism that filled the air. This was the moment she had been preparing for. Ever since the news of Dae-ho's actions had reached Earth, instead of defending this soldier's actions, she continued, I propose that Earth provide special military consultants to assist with the ongoing conflict against the Drakari Empire. These consultants will demonstrate proper human military doctrine and show you exactly what humans are capable of when they are properly motivated. The Vorthok representative leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering with interest. And what qualifications would these consultants have? Park smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. They will be selected from Earth's most secure military detention facilities. Former soldiers who have been imprisoned for various offenses against military law. They will be given a chance to redeem themselves by serving the coalition. The chamber erupted in surprised chatter. Several representatives stood up, talking rapidly in their own languages. The translator system struggled to keep up with the sudden flood of conversation. The Thurian commander raised one massive hand for silence. When the chamber quieted, he spoke again. You propose to send us your criminals. Your rejects your failures. That is correct, Park replied calmly. These individuals have extensive military experience. They have been removed from regular service for various reasons, but their skills remain intact. They understand warfare in ways that our regular soldiers do not. The Koroth representative stood up, his fur bristling with agitation. This is insulting. You offer us your garbage, your unwanted refuse. Park remained unruffled. I offer you soldiers who have nothing left to lose and everything to prove. They have seen the worst of humanity and they understand what it means to fall from grace. They will fight harder than any regular soldier because they are fighting for their chance at redemption. The Zilani delegate hissed through her sharp teeth. And what makes you think these criminals will be any more effective than your mercy-obsessed regular troops? Because Park said quietly, they have learned that mercy is not weakness, it is the ultimate strength. They know that showing compassion requires more courage than showing cruelty. They understand that the hardest battles are fought not with weapons, but with understanding. The chamber was silent again. Every representative was staring at her with varying degrees of confusion and disbelief. They had expected her to beg for leniency for Dae-ho. Instead, she was offering them something they had never seen before. The Therian commander studied her for a long moment. His glowing eyes seemed to pierce right through her. Finally, he spoke. "You believe these criminals can succeed where our regular forces have failed. I believe they can show you what humans are truly capable of when they are properly motivated." Park replied, "Our species has a saying that the darkest hour comes just before the dawn. These soldiers have lived through their darkest hour. They are ready for their dawn." The Vorthak representative clicked his claws thoughtfully. "And if they fail, if they prove to be as useless as we expect, then you will have proven your point about humanity," Park said simply, "and we will accept whatever judgment you pass on our species." The chamber buzzed with quiet conversation as the representatives considered her proposal. It was unlike anything they had ever heard. An entire species offering to be judged by their worst members instead of their best. The Therian commander finally nodded. "Very well, Ambassador Park, we will accept your proposal. Your criminal consultants will be given command of the most difficult sector of the war zone. If they succeed in achieving what our regular forces cannot, then we will reconsider our position on human military capabilities." Park bowed slightly. "Thank you, Commander. You will not regret this decision." But as she left the chamber, she wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake. She had gambled the future of humanity on the skills of soldiers who had been deemed unfit for service. The fate of her entire species now rested in the hands of criminals and outcasts. Back on Earth, the news of her proposal spread quickly. Military prisons across the planet began receiving unusual visitors, government officials with classified documents and strange offers of redemption. The first to be approached was Colonel Yu Tae-min. He had been serving a life sentence for questioning orders during the Korean Reunification War. His cell was small and dark, but his mind was still sharp. When the officials explained the situation, he listened quietly. "So, you want me to save humanity by proving that criminals can be heroes?" he said finally. The government official nodded. "That is essentially correct." Colonel Yu smiled. "For the first time in 3 years. When do we leave?" Within days, transport ships were loading with some of the most dangerous and skilled soldiers Earth had ever produced. They were men and women who had fallen from grace, who had made terrible choices, who had been cast out by society, but they were also warriors who understood something that the regular military had forgotten. War was not about following orders. It was about making impossible choices in impossible situations, and sometimes the best soldiers were the ones who had already made their worst mistakes. The convoy departed for the war zone carrying Earth's last hope in the form of its greatest failures. None of them knew if they would succeed, but they all knew that failure was not an option. This was their chance at redemption, and they were not going to waste it. The first transport ship touched down on the barren surface of Korath Station. In the dead of night, the station was a massive military complex built into the side of a mountain overlooking the contested zone where coalition forces had been fighting the Drakari Empire for over 2 years without making any real progress. Colonel Yu Tae-min was the first to step off the ship. His legs were stiff from the long journey, but his eyes were sharp as he surveyed the scene before him. The station was a mess. Supply containers were scattered everywhere. Soldiers moved around with the slow, exhausted movements of troops who had been fighting too long without hope. Behind him came Major Lee, Sunni Captain Kim Hyun-soo, and dozens of other former prisoners. Each one had been selected for specific skills that Earth thought might be useful in this impossible war. They were weapons specialists, tactical experts, psychological warfare veterans, and intelligence operatives. All of them had been thrown away by the regular military for various reasons. The coalition officers who met them at the landing pad looked skeptical. A tall Vorthak general named Klix approached with his usual clicking gait. His compound eyes examined each human with obvious disdain. "So, these are the criminals Earth has sent to save us," he said through his translator. The mechanical voice somehow managed to convey his contempt perfectly. Colonel Yu stepped forward. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were cold. "We are here to do a job, General. That job is to win a war that your regular forces have been losing for 2 years, General." Klix reared back in surprise at the human's directness. No coalition officer had ever spoken to him like that before. The audacity was almost refreshing. "The war situation is more complex than you understand, Colonel. The Drakari Empire has defensive positions that are mathematically impossible to breach. Their fortress on Ridge 7 has withstood every assault we have attempted. You nodded slowly. Show me. The next few hours were spent in briefing rooms going over tactical displays and casualty reports. The situation was worse than Earth had been told. The Drakari had built a series of interconnected fortresses that controlled all the high ground in the region. Every approach was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Every assault had ended in disaster. Major Li Sun Mi studied the holographic displays with interest. She had been court-martialed for using unauthorized intelligence-gathering methods during the Martian independence conflict. Her techniques had been effective, but they had also been considered too unethical for regular military use. She pointed to one of the fortress complexes. What do we know about their supply lines? General clicked impatiently. Supply lines are irrelevant. The fortresses are self-sufficient. They have enough food and ammunition to last for years. Sun Mi smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Nothing is self-sufficient, General. Everything depends on something else. The question is, what do they depend on that they do not want us to know about? Captain Kim Hyun-soo had been listening quietly while studying the technical specifications of the Drakari weapon systems. He had been imprisoned for conducting unauthorized experiments with captured alien technology. His work had been brilliant, but it had also violated numerous safety protocols. The energy signatures on their defensive systems, he said suddenly, they are not standard Drakari technology. General Klixt looked at him with surprise. How can you tell? Because Hyun-soo replied, I have studied every piece of Drakari equipment we have ever captured. These fortresses are using something else, something they do not want us to analyze. The coalition officers exchanged glances. This was information that their own intelligence services had missed completely. How had these criminals spotted it so quickly? Colonel Yu stood up and walked to the main display. He studied the terrain for several minutes while the others watched in silence. Finally, he turned back to the group. General Klix, I need to speak with whoever is in charge of prisoner interrogation. The Vorthek general clicked in confusion. We do not take prisoners. The Drakari fight to the death. Exactly, you replied, and that is why you have been losing this war for 2 years. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at the human colonel with varying degrees of shock and confusion. Sun Mi understood. First, her smile grew wider. You want to change the rules of engagement? You nodded. The Drakari expect us to fight like every other species in the coalition. They expect honor and glory and massive frontal assaults. They expect us to play by their rules, but humans do not play by anyone else's rules. General Klix was becoming agitated. This is madness. The Drakari are honorable warriors. They will never surrender. They will never be taken alive. That is what they want us to believe, you said quietly. But I have read their cultural files, I know their history, and I know that their honor code has very specific requirements about how they treat prisoners. The next morning, the human criminals began implementing their plan. It was unlike anything the coalition had ever seen before. Instead of massing troops for another assault, they began what appeared to be a complete withdrawal. General Klix watched in horror as human soldiers abandoned their forward positions and pulled back to defensive lines. The Drakari forces emerged from their fortresses for the first time in months, cautiously advancing to occupy the abandoned ground. What are they doing? He demanded. This is retreat. This is surrender. Colonel Yu stood beside him on the observation deck, watching the enemy movement through binoculars. Actually, General, this is bait. The Drakari advance continued for several hours. They were clearly confused by the human withdrawal, but they were also excited by this unexpected opportunity to gain ground. Their honor code demanded that they pursue a retreating enemy. By evening, the first Drakari patrols had advanced far enough to trigger the trap. Captain Hyun-soo had been working all day to set up captured Drakari communication equipment in a way that would broadcast on their military frequencies. When the patrols tried to report back to their fortresses, they heard something impossible. Human voices speaking perfect Drakari language, surrendering according to the ancient protocols. The psychological impact was immediate. The Drakari soldiers who heard the broadcasts were thrown into confusion according to their honor code. They were required to accept surrender and treat prisoners with respect, but no enemy had ever surrendered to them before. They had no experience with this situation. Major Sun Mi had spent days studying Drakari cultural files and prisoner interviews. She knew exactly which phrases to use, which rituals to invoke, which ancient traditions to reference. The broadcasts were designed to create maximum confusion and hesitation. The first Drakari Patrol to investigate the surrender broadcasts found a small group of human soldiers, who had apparently abandoned their weapons and were requesting mercy according to proper Drakari protocol. The patrol leader was faced with an impossible decision. His orders were to kill all humans on sight, but his honor code required him to accept surrender and protect prisoners. The two commands were in direct conflict. After several minutes of heated discussion among his warriors, the patrol leader made the only decision his culture would allow. He accepted the surrender and began escorting the human prisoners back toward the fortress. He had no way of knowing that each human prisoner was actually a highly trained infiltrator carrying concealed weapons and demolition charges. The fortress on Ridge 7 had been impregnable for over 2 years. No direct assault had ever come close to breaching its defenses, but it had never been designed to defend against enemies who walked through the front gate as honored prisoners. By dawn, the fortress was in human hands. The Drakari defenders had been completely overwhelmed by attacks from within their own walls. The impossible had happened. General Clixes stared at the tactical display in disbelief. "How did you do this, Colonel?" Yu smiled grimly. "We did what humans do best, General. We changed the rules of the game. The war was far from over, but everything had changed. The Drakari Empire was about to learn that fighting humans was unlike fighting any other species in the galaxy. These criminals from Earth understood something that regular soldiers did not. Sometimes the best way to win a war was to make your enemy question everything they thought they knew about warfare." Private Kang Daeho crouched behind the broken wall of what used to be a hospital on Valara Prime. The smell of smoke and burnt metal filled his nose as he checked his rifle for the third time in 5 minutes. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. He had been in combat for 6 months now, and fear was something he had learned to push down deep inside himself. The shaking came from something else entirely. It came from the sounds he could hear through the rubble, soft moaning voices calling out in pain, speaking words he could not understand, but somehow knew were pleas for help. The voices belonged to the enemy, the Drakari soldiers who had been trying to kill him and his unit just hours before Daeho pressed his back against the concrete wall and closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about his little brother back on Earth, Kim Junho, who was probably sitting in their small apartment playing video games and complaining about homework, simple problems, normal problems, the kind of problems Daeho wished he still had. The mission orders had been clear: secure the medical facility, eliminate any remaining enemy combatants, move to the next objective, no exceptions, no delays, no mercy. The Galactic Defense Coalition did not believe in showing kindness to the Drakari Empire. They were the enemy, pure and simple, but those voices in the rubble did not sound like monsters. They sounded like people in pain. Daeho opened his eyes and looked at his communicator. Sergeant Kim Woo-jin would be expecting his report soon. The rest of his squad was already moving to the next building, leaving him to finish clearing this one. He could easily report that the area was secure. No one would question him. No one would know. He stood up slowly and made his way through the broken doorway into what had been the main treatment area of the hospital. Medical equipment lay scattered everywhere. Broken glass crunched under his boots. 4 stands stood like metal skeletons against the walls. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting strange shadows across the destruction. The moaning was louder, now coming from behind a pile of collapsed ceiling tiles. Daeho raised his rifle and moved closer. His training told him to call out for surrender first. Give them a chance to give up before shooting, but something made him stop. He could see them now. 3 Drakari soldiers trapped under chunks of concrete and twisted metal. Their purple skin was covered in cuts, and their breathing was shallow. One of them was very young, maybe even younger than his brother back home. The alien soldier looked up at him with large golden eyes filled with pain and fear. The young Drakari said something in his own language. His voice was weak but desperate. He was pointing at his leg, which was pinned under a heavy piece of debris. Blood was seeping through his uniform, creating a dark stain on the floor. Daeho should have pulled the trigger right then and there. Enemy soldiers were enemy soldiers regardless of their condition. That was what his training said. That was what the Coalition expected, but instead he found himself lowering his weapon. The other 2 Drakari soldiers were in even worse condition. One was unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. The other was trying to crawl toward what looked like a medical supply cabinet, but could barely move her right arm. These were not the fierce warriors he had been told about in briefings. These were not the monsters that coalition propaganda described. They were hurt, scared, and dying just like any human soldier would be in the same situation. Daeho made a decision that would change everything. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and moved toward the medical supply cabinet, the injured Drakari. Soldier, who had been trying to reach it, looked at him with confusion and wariness. She said something sharp in her language, probably a warning or threat, but Daeho ignored her words and started searching through the supplies. Most of the equipment was damaged, but he found some basic medical items: bandages, pain medication, sterilizing solution, the same kind of first aid supplies he had learned to use during his basic training. He knelt beside the young soldier, first the one who reminded him of his brother. The alien tried to pull away but was too weak to move far. Daeho spoke softly, even though he knew the soldier could not understand him. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you. Let me help you." He began working to free the soldier's trapped leg. It took nearly 20 minutes to carefully move the debris without causing more damage. When the leg was finally free, Daeho could see it was badly broken but not beyond repair. With proper treatment, the soldier would walk. Again, the young Drakari looked at him with amazement as Daeho cleaned and bandaged the wound. He had never seen a human up close before and certainly never expected one to help him. The other two soldiers watched in silence as this enemy soldier worked to save their lives. Daeho moved to the unconscious soldier next. The head wound was serious but not fatal. He cleaned it carefully and applied pressure to stop the bleeding. Then he moved to the female soldier who had been trying to reach the supplies. Her arm was dislocated and she had several deep cuts across her chest. As he worked, Daeho found himself thinking about why he was doing this. These soldiers had been trying to kill him and his friends just hours before. They were part of an empire that wanted to destroy human colonies and drive humanity back to Earth. But looking at them now hurt and helpless, he could not see them as enemies. They were someone else's children, someone else's family members. They had hopes and dreams, and people who loved them just like he did. The young soldier especially reminded him so much of Junho that it made his chest tight with emotion. Time passed without him realizing it. The emergency lights continued to flicker and the sounds of distant fighting echoed through the city, but in this small space there was only the quiet work of healing. When he was finished, all three soldiers were stable. Their wounds were cleaned and bandaged, and they were no longer in immediate danger. The young soldier reached out and touched Daeho's hand. His golden eyes were full of gratitude and confusion. He spoke again in his own language, but this time the words sounded different. Less afraid, more thankful. Daeho was so focused on his patience that he did not hear the footsteps behind him. He did not notice the shadow falling across the floor. He only looked up when he heard the familiar voice of his commanding officer, Private Kang. "What the hell are you doing?" Sergeant Kim Woo-jin stood in the doorway staring at the scene before him. His face was a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. Behind him stood two other soldiers from their unit, both looking equally stunned. Daeho slowly stood up, his hands still covered in alien blood. He looked at his sergeant, then at the three wounded soldiers, then back at his sergeant. He knew he was in trouble. He knew he had violated direct orders. But he also knew he had done the right thing. "Sir," he said quietly, "I found them wounded. I was providing medical assistance." The sergeant stepped closer, his voice rising. "You were what? These are enemy combatants, Private. Do you understand what you have done?" Daeho nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I understand." But as he said those words, he realized that he understood much more than just the trouble he was in. He understood that sometimes being human meant making choices that others might not understand. Sometimes it meant showing mercy, even when mercy was not expected or wanted. The young Drakari soldier was still holding his hand. Lieutenant Commander Nam Bioram had been sitting in a military prison for 3 years before the offer came. The cell was small and gray, and she had grown to hate every inch of it, but the isolation had given her time to think about what had gone wrong. During her last assignment, she had been court-martialed for conducting unauthorized psychological experiments on captured enemy soldiers during the Centauri Rebellion. Her methods had been effective, but they had also been considered too harsh for regular military use. The investigating officers had called her work cruel and unusual. Now, as she stood in the command center of the captured Drakari fortress, she realized that those same officers had never truly understood the nature of warfare. War was not about being kind or fair or following rules. War was about breaking your enemy so completely that they could never fight again. The fortress on Ridge 7 was just the beginning. Colonel Yu had given her a simple mission: use whatever methods necessary to convince the Drakari Empire that continuing this war was pointless. She had smiled when he said it. It was the first time in years that someone had asked her to do what she did best. The Drakari prisoners from the fortress were being held in their own detention cells. The irony was not lost on her. These same cells had held coalition soldiers just days before. Now the situation was reversed, but more importantly, the Drakari had never experienced being prisoners before. In their entire military history, the Drakari had never surrendered. They had never been captured. They had never faced the psychological trauma of defeat. Their honor code demanded that they fight to the death rather than face the shame of capture, which made them perfect subjects for her experiments. Boram walked through the detention area, studying each prisoner carefully. There were 43 of them, ranging from young recruits to seasoned veterans. All of them showed the same expression of confusion and disbelief. They could not understand how they had ended up in this situation. The fortress commander was a grizzled veteran named Korth Vash. He had been fighting coalition forces for over a decade and had never lost a single battle. His golden eyes tracked her movement with obvious hatred. Human, he growled in broken coalition standard, you have no honor. You fight like cowards. Boram stopped in front of his cell and smiled. That is exactly what I wanted to hear, Commander, because now I know what you value most. She spent the next several hours interviewing each prisoner individually. Her questions were not about military intelligence or tactical information. Instead, she asked about their families, their beliefs, their understanding of honor and duty. The Drakari were confused by her approach. They had expected torture or interrogation about military secrets. Instead, this human woman seemed genuinely interested in understanding their culture. She asked about their children, their traditions, their hopes for the future. By the end of the first day, several of the younger prisoners were actually enjoying their conversations with her. She was the first human they had ever spoken with, and she seemed to genuinely respect their beliefs. She even brought them food that was prepared according to their dietary customs. The older prisoners were more suspicious, but they too found themselves drawn into conversation. This human understood their language better than most coalition translators. She knew their history, their legends, their sacred songs. On the second day, Boram began phase 2 of her plan. She started showing the prisoners news footage from the war, but not the footage they expected. Instead of showing Drakari victories or coalition defeats, she showed them something else entirely. She showed them coalition medical teams treating wounded Drakari soldiers. She showed them human engineers rebuilding damaged Drakari civilian infrastructure. She showed them coalition food convoys delivering supplies to Drakari refugee camps. The prisoners watched in stunned silence as the footage played. These were not the humans they had been told about. These were not the monsters that their propaganda had described. These were people who cared about civilian casualties, who went out of their way to minimize suffering. Commander Vash was the first to speak. This is fake human propaganda designed to confuse us. Boram shook her head. No, Commander, this is real footage from your own surveillance systems. We captured it when we took your communication networks. She pulled up technical displays showing the source codes and authentication markers that proved the footage was genuine. The prisoners stared at the evidence, unable to deny what they were seeing. But why? A young soldier asked. Why do you care about our people if we are at war? Boram looked at him carefully. Because war is not about destroying your enemy, it is about making them understand that fighting is pointless. We could have killed all of you when we took this fortress, but instead we gave you medical treatment and proper food. Why do you think that is? The young soldier looked confused. Because you need us for information. No, she replied, because we want you to go home and tell your people what you have seen. We want you to tell them that humans are not monsters. We want you to tell them that this war could end tomorrow if your leaders simply agreed to negotiate. The psychological impact was immediate. Several prisoners began whispering among themselves in their own language. Their voices carried tones of confusion and doubt. Everything they had been taught about humans was being challenged by direct experience. Boram continued showing them footage. Human soldiers risking their lives to evacuate Drakari civilians from war zones. Coalition medical teams working around the clock to treat wounded Drakari soldiers, human engineers, rebuilding schools and hospitals that had been damaged in the fighting. The most powerful footage showed Private Kangde-ho treating wounded Drakari soldiers in the hospital on Velara Prime. The same action that had started this entire crisis was now being used to demonstrate human compassion. Look at this soldier, Beo Ram said as the footage played. He was charged with treason for helping your wounded warriors. His own people wanted to punish him for showing mercy to his enemies. What does that tell you about the kind of species you are fighting? Commander Vash stared at the screen in silence. The young human soldier on the display was carefully bandaging a wounded Drakari warrior. The alien soldier was looking up at his human rescuer with obvious gratitude. This changes nothing, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Boram smiled. It changes everything, Commander. Because now you know that humans are not the enemy you thought you were fighting. Now you know that we are capable of mercy even when mercy is not expected. Over the following days, the psychological pressure continued. Boram arranged for the prisoners to receive personal messages from their families back home. Many of these messages had been intercepted by coalition intelligence, but they had never been used as weapons before. The prisoners watched videos of their children playing in schoolyards, their spouses working in gardens, their parents praying for their safe return. The messages were full of love and hope and the simple, everyday concerns of ordinary people. The contrast was devastating. Here they were, prisoners of war captured by an enemy they had been taught to hate, while their families back home were living normal, peaceful lives. The war that seemed so important on the battlefield felt abstract and meaningless when viewed through the lens of personal relationships. Commander Vash was the last to break. On the 7th day of captivity, he asked to speak with Boram privately. When she entered his cell, he was sitting on his bunk staring at a photo of his family. What do you want from us? He asked quietly. Boram sat down across from him. I want you to understand that this war is hurting everyone. Your soldiers are soldiers, your families are families. The only people who benefit from continued fighting are the politicians and generals who never have to pull triggers or watch their friends die. Vash looked up at her with tired eyes. What are you proposing? I am proposing that you and your warriors go home, she said simply. Tell your people what you have seen here. Tell them that humans are not monsters. Tell them that we are willing to negotiate peace if they are willing to listen. The commander was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, and if we refuse? Boram shrugged. Then you will be treated as prisoners of war according to coalition protocols. You will be fed and housed and given medical care until the war ends, but you will not be able to return to your families. You will not be able to see your children grow up. You will not be able to protect the people you love. Choice was clear. Stay as. The challenge came on a cold morning when the twin suns of the Korath system were hidden behind thick clouds. General Korthvex, the greatest warrior in the Drakari Empire, stood on a hilltop overlooking the human positions. His massive frame was silhouetted against the gray sky, and his voice carried across the battlefield like thunder. I challenged the humans to single combat, he roared. His words were translated and broadcast on all frequencies so that every soldier in both armies could hear them. According to the ancient laws of our people, this conflict will be decided by champions, one warrior from each side fighting with honor until one admits defeat or dies. The announcement sent shockwaves through both military camps. The Drakari soldiers cheered and beat their weapons against their shields. This was how wars were supposed to be decided, not with tricks and psychological manipulation, but with strength and skill and courage. The coalition officers were less enthusiastic. General Klix clicked his claws nervously as he studied the massive Drakari general through his binoculars. Korthvex was legendary throughout the galaxy. He had never lost a single combat in over 30 years of warfare. He was faster than most humans, stronger than most aliens, and more experienced than anyone alive. Colonel Yu received the challenge in his command bunker. He read the formal declaration twice before setting it down on his desk. Around him, the other human criminals watched in silence, waiting for his decision. This is perfect, Captain Kim Hyun-soo said finally. This is exactly what we need. Major Lee Sun-mi looked at him like he had lost his mind. Are you insane? Korthvex is the most dangerous warrior in known space. He has killed hundreds of opponents in single combat. Exactly, Hyun-soo replied, which is why this is perfect. Everyone expects us to send our strongest fighter, our best soldier, our most experienced warrior. But what if we do something completely different, Lieutenant? Commander Nambiorem understood. First, her eyes lit up with sudden comprehension. You want to send someone unexpected, someone who will change the entire meaning of the combat, Colonel. You nodded slowly. I want to send Private Kang Daeho. The room fell. Silent, everyone stared at him in shock. Daeho had been serving with the criminal units for several weeks, now learning their methods and adapting to their unconventional approach to warfare, but he was still the same young soldier who had been court-martialed for showing mercy. You cannot be serious, son, he said. He has no combat experience against opponents like Korthvex. He will be killed in seconds. That is exactly the point, you replied. We are not trying to win this fight through superior combat skills. We are trying to win it through superior understanding of what this war is really about. He turned to look at each of them in turn. Korthvex expects to face a warrior. He expects honor and glory and a glorious death. He expects everything to follow the traditional patterns. But what if we give him something completely different? What if we give him a teacher instead of a fighter? Plan was insane by any conventional military standard, but the human criminals had already proven that conventional military standards were useless against an enemy like the Drakari Empire. They had won battles by surrendering. They had captured fortresses by becoming prisoners. They had broken enemy morale by showing kindness. Now they were going to try to end the entire war by sending a medic to fight the greatest warrior in galactic history. When Private Daeho received his orders, he did not argue. He did not protest. He simply nodded and began preparing for what would probably be his death. The other soldiers watched him clean his rifle and check his medical supplies with quiet respect. You do not have to do this, one of them said quietly. We could refuse the challenge. Find another way. Daeho looked up from his equipment. Yes, I do, he said simply. This is why I joined the military, to protect people, to help people, to make sure that wars like this can end. The combat was scheduled for dawn the next day. Representatives from both armies would gather on the neutral ground between the two camps to witness the battle. News of the challenge had spread throughout both empires, and billions of beings would be watching the live broadcasts. General Korthvex spent the evening before the combat in meditation and prayer. According to Drakari tradition, he sharpened his ceremonial weapons and reviewed the combat forms that had made him legendary. His golden eyes glowed with anticipation. This would be his greatest victory. Private Daeho spent the same evening writing letters to his family. He told his brother Junho to study hard and stay out of trouble. He told his parents that he loved them and that he was proud to serve. He did not mention that he was probably going to die. When dawn came, the two armies gathered on opposite sides of a flat valley floor. A circle had been marked in the dirt with white powder, and weapons racks had been set up containing traditional melee weapons from both cultures. The rules was simple: enter the circle, fight until one warrior could no longer continue. General Korthvex strode into the circle with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. He was 3 meters tall, with muscles like steel cables and scars that told the story of 100 battles. His ceremonial armor gleamed in the morning light, and his weapons were works of art as much as instruments of death. Private Daeho walked to the circle from the opposite direction. He looked small and fragile compared to his opponent. His standard military uniform was clean but unremarkable. His only weapons were a basic sidearm and the medical kit he always carried. The contrast was so stark that several alien observers laughed out loud. The two warriors met in the center of the circle. General Korthvex looked down at the young human with something approaching pity. You are brave, little one, he said in accented coalition standard, but bravery alone will not save you. I will try to make your death quick and honorable. Daeho looked up at him calmly. Thank you, General, that is very kind, but I did not come here to die. I came here to talk. The Drakari general blinked in confusion. Talk? This is single combat, not a diplomatic meeting. I know, Daeho replied, but I wanted to tell you about some soldiers I met. Few weeks ago, 3 Drakari warriors who were wounded and trapped in a bombed hospital. They were scared and hurt and calling for their families. Korthvex stepped back, his golden eyes narrowing. What are you doing, human? The formal combat began with the sound of a horn, but instead of drawing his weapon, Daeho began to speak. He told the story of the wounded soldiers in the hospital. He described their injuries, their fear, their gratitude when he helped them. He spoke about the young soldier who reminded him of his brother, the Drakari. General charged forward with a roar, raising his massive sword above his head. But something in the human's words made him hesitate. His strike was less powerful than it should have been, giving Deho time to dodge. The combat continued, but it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. Instead of trying to match the general's strength, Deho kept talking. He spoke about the Drakari prisoners who had been returned to their families. He talked about the children in the refugee camps. He described the mothers who waited for news of their sons. With each story, Korthvex became more confused and conflicted. This was not how single combat was supposed to work. His opponent was not fighting with honor and glory. He was fighting with words and emotions and memories. The psychological pressure was enormous every time the general raised his weapon. Deho would tell another story about Drakari soldiers he had helped, about families that had been reunited, about children who just wanted their parents to come home. The watching armies fell silent as they realized what was happening. This was not a battle between warriors. This was a battle between different ideas of what warfare should be. The general represented the old ways, honor and glory and death. The human represented something new, compassion and understanding and life. The climax came when Korthvex finally managed to corner his opponent. The general's sword was raised for a killing blow. When Deho spoke one final time, "General," he said quietly, "I know about your son." The sword stopped inches from Deho's neck. The general stared down at him with wide golden eyes. Korthvex Deho continued, age 17, wounded in the assault on Station Beta 7, currently recovering in a military hospital on Drakari Prime, missing his left arm but alive and asking when his father will come home. The sword fell from the general's nerveless fingers. He staggered backward as if he had been struck. "How do you know this?" "Because we have been monitoring Drakari communications for months," Deho said gently. "We know about all the wounded, all the families, all the children who miss their parents. We know because we care about them just like you do." Vex collapsed to his knees in the center of the combat circle. Tears streamed down his face as the full weight of the human's words hit him. This enemy soldier knew more about his family than many of his own officers did. "This war is not about territory or resources or honor," Deho said as he knelt beside the weeping general. "It is about people who love each other and want to go home. Your son needs his father, General. Your wife needs her husband. Your people need their greatest warrior to help them find peace." The combat was over, but no one had died. Instead, something far more powerful had happened. Two enemies had found common ground in their love for family and their desire for peace. General Korthvex stood slowly and looked around at the watching armies. Then he did something that shocked everyone present. He removed his ceremonial armor and weapons and laid them at Deho's feet. "I surrender." The surrender of General Korthvex sent shockwaves throughout both empires. Within hours, news of the unprecedented single combat was being broadcast on every communication network in known space. The image of the Drakari Empire's greatest warrior kneeling before a young human medic became the most viewed recording in galactic history, but the real impact was not in the recording itself. It was in what happened next. General Korthvex did not simply surrender and disappear. Instead, he became the most powerful advocate for peace that either side had ever seen, standing before the assembled Drakari High Command. Just days after the combat, the general spoke with passion and conviction that surprised even his oldest allies. "My fellow warriors," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of military service, "I have seen the face of our enemy, and it is not what we were told. It is not the face of monsters or demons. It is the face of people who care about their families just as much as we care about ours." The High Command listened in stunned silence as their greatest hero described his experience in the combat circle. He told them about the human soldiers' compassion, about the medical care given to Drakari prisoners, about the families that had been reunited through human mercy. "This human knew about my son," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "He knew about Korthjeth's injuries, about his recovery, about his questions about when I would come home. How can we call someone an enemy when they care more about our children than some of our own officers do?" The political impact was immediate. The Drakari Empire had built their entire war effort around the premise that humans were savage beasts who threatened galactic civilization, but their greatest warrior was now telling them that humans were actually the most compassionate species he had ever encountered. Within the coalition, the response was equally dramatic. The alien representatives who had demanded court Marshal for Private Deho now found themselves facing an impossible situation. The soldier they had wanted to punish for showing mercy had just ended a war that their combined fleets had been unable to win. Ambassador Park Ji-woo stood before the Galactic Defense Council for the final time. Her proposal to send criminal soldiers had been vindicated in the most spectacular way possible, but her expression was not one of triumph. It was one of quiet satisfaction the evidence speaks for itself. She said simply, "Our criminals did not win this war through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. They won it by demonstrating the fundamental truth that mercy is stronger than violence, compassion is more powerful than hatred, and understanding can defeat even the most entrenched enemy." General clicked his claws nervously as he studied the data from the conflict. The humans had achieved total victory while suffering minimal casualties. They had captured multiple enemy strongholds, converted enemy soldiers to allies, and ended a 2-year stalemate in a matter of weeks. How did they do it? He asked finally. What made these criminals so much more effective than our regular forces? Park smiled, because they understood something that regular soldiers often forget. War is not about destroying your enemy. It is about convincing your enemy that fighting is pointless. Our criminals had all made terrible mistakes in their past. They understood the cost of violence better than anyone. They knew that the only real victory comes when both sides can go home to their families. The formal court-martial proceedings against Private Deho were quietly dropped. Instead, he was awarded the Coalition Medal of Honor and promoted to lieutenant. The ceremony was broadcast throughout both empires and became a symbol of the power of individual courage and compassion. But Deho himself was not interested in medals or promotions. When offered a position at Coalition headquarters, he politely declined. "I just want to go home," he said simply. "I want to see my brother. I want to help my parents in their shop. I want to live a normal life and remember what we were all fighting to protect." The human criminals who had made the victory possible were offered full pardons and positions in the regular coalition military. Most accepted the pardons, but many chose to return to Earth to rebuild their lives. Some stayed in the military, using their hard-won wisdom to train future soldiers in the arts of unconventional warfare. Colonel Yu Temin was offered the position of Supreme Coalition Military Advisor, but he too chose to return home. He opened a small school where he taught young officers that the greatest military victories were often won without firing a shot. Major Lee Sun-mi became the head of the new Coalition Department of Cultural Understanding. Her job was to study alien societies and find ways to resolve conflicts through negotiation rather than warfare. Her first assignment was to establish permanent diplomatic relations with the Drakari Empire. The war officially ended 3 months after the single combat a peace treaty was signed on the same hill where General Korthvex had issued his challenge. Representatives from both empires gathered to witness the ceremony, and the document was signed with pens made from metal taken from weapons that would never be used again. General Korthvex himself served as the primary Drakari negotiator. His transformation from warrior to peacemaker had inspired an entire generation of young Drakari soldiers to question the value of endless warfare. The Empire began redirecting its military resources toward exploration and scientific research. The peace treaty included provisions for cultural exchange programs, prisoner repatriation efforts, and joint humanitarian missions. Within 2 years, former enemies were working together to provide disaster relief to planets affected by natural catastrophes. Private Deho returned to Earth 6 months after the war's end. He was met at the spaceport by his family, including his brother Junho, who had grown 3 inches during his absence. The reunion was quiet and emotional, with none of the fanfare that usually accompanied returning war heroes. As they drove through the familiar streets of Seoul, Junho asked his brother about the war, about the aliens, about the famous single combat that had made him famous throughout the galaxy. Deho was quiet for a long moment before answering. "It was not about fighting," he said finally. "It was about understanding that everyone just wants to go home to their family. Everyone wants their children to be safe. Everyone wants to live in peace. The only difference between us and them was that we forgot we were all fighting for the same things." Years later, when historians studied the end of the Drakari War, they would identify multiple factors that contributed to humanity's unexpected victory: superior tactics, unconventional strategies, psychological warfare, and diplomatic Innovation all played important roles, but the soldiers who had actually fought the war knew the truth. The victory had come not from any military technique or strategic brilliance. It had come from the simple recognition that their enemies were not monsters, but people with families and hopes and dreams and fears. Just like themselves, the lesson spread throughout the galaxy. Other conflicts were resolved through similar means. Soldiers began to see their enemies as individuals rather than abstract threats. Diplomats began to focus on shared humanity rather than political differences. Private Kang Dae-ho never sought fame or recognition for his role in ending the war. He returned to his normal life, worked in his parents' shop, and eventually became a teacher himself, but his name became synonymous with the idea that one person acting with courage and compassion could change the entire course of history. The galaxy had learned an important lesson that day. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from being stronger or smarter or more ruthless than your enemies. Sometimes they come from being more human, and in a universe full of different species, with different cultures and different ways of thinking, being human meant something very specific. It meant caring about others even when others were trying to hurt you. It meant showing mercy even when mercy was not expected. It meant fighting for peace even when everyone else was fighting for war. The criminals from Earth had proven that redemption was possible for anyone, that even the worst mistakes could be overcome with courage and determination, and that sometimes the people society had given up on were exactly the people society needed most. But most importantly, they had proven that mercy was not weakness. It was the ultimate strength, and in a galaxy that had forgotten the power of compassion, humanity had reminded everyone what it truly meant to be civilized.